Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. The text message arrived at 3:47 a.m., jerking me from the kind of sleep you only get after 18 hours straight of data processing. My phone's glow cut through the darkness of my cramped apartment above Kowalski's Deli in downtown Baltimore. Turn on Channel 7 now, Tommy. Tommy Brennan doesn't text unless someone's died or the world's ending. We'd worked together at Goddard for 3 years before I got shit-canned for attitude problems, apparently questioning why we were spending millions tracking space junk instead of actual discoveries. Makes you a troublemaker. I fumbled for the remote, knocking over yesterday's coffee mug. The local news was running some bullshit about traffic delays, but then the anchor's expression shifted. That look when producers are screaming in your earpiece. We're receiving breaking reports from NASA regarding an unprecedented discovery by the James Webb Space Telescope. The screen filled with an image that made my hangover vanish instantly. A structure, impossibly massive, hanging in the black between worlds. It looked carved from obsidian and starlight, with geometries that hurt to study too closely. Spires twisted in directions that shouldn't exist, connected by bridges that seemed to bend space around them. For weeks, NASA thought the floating temple near the Kuiper belt was a beautiful dead relic, a silent monument. That was until they used the Webb telescope's infrared camera. And last night, they saw them. Heat signatures, thousands of them moving slowly inside the temple's vast open halls. My blood turned to ice water. I knew that voice. Dr. Patricia Vance, Tommy's supervisor, the same woman who'd signed my termination papers. They're not just moving, they're gathering in unison. It's not a tomb, it's an active place of worship, and it feels like the congregation is waiting for the main event to begin. The camera cut back to the anchor, whose professional mask was slipping. Behind him, you could see staffers clustered around monitors, their faces painted with the same mix of awe and terror I was feeling. My phone rang. Tommy's name flashed on the screen. "Jesus Christ, Danny," he whispered when I answered. "You seeing this?" "Yeah, I'm seeing it. What the hell is going on?" "They pulled me in 4 hours ago, emergency briefing. Danny, this thing, it's been watching us. The thermal readings, they're not random. There's a pattern, and..." His voice dropped even lower. "The pattern matches our radio telescope broadcasts. Every signal we've sent into deep space over the last 30 years. Static crackled through the line. "Tommy? Fuck, they're calling another meeting. Danny, listen to me. Stay away from the lab. Don't come here. Something's wrong. The people in charge, they're excited about this. Too excited. Like they've been waiting for..." The line went dead. Outside my window, sirens began wailing in the distance. I looked back at the television, where the temple rotated slowly in the void, its impossible architecture seeming to pulse with a rhythm I could feel in my bones. The congregation was gathering, and somehow I knew we were about to find out what they'd been waiting for. 20 minutes later, I was driving my beat-up Honda through the empty streets toward Greenbank, Tommy's warning echoing in my head. The radio stations had all switched to emergency broadcasts, but they were just repeating the same sanitized NASA statement about monitoring the situation. The Goddard parking lot was chaos. News vans clustered around the main entrance like metal vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward the pre-dawn sky. Security guards were setting up barriers, but I knew the back service road that led to Building 28. Tommy had snuck me out that way the day I got fired. The loading dock was deserted except for a single figure smoking beside the dumpsters. Jake Novak, night shift security. Same guy who used to let me back in during all-nighters when I'd forgotten my badge. "Danny Castellano," he said, crushing his cigarette under his boot. "Figured you'd show up. Your boy Tommy's been asking for you." "He called you?" "Didn't need to. Been watching the feeds from the control room all night. Whatever's got them spooked up there, it's big. Real big." Jake's weathered face creased into a grin. "Besides, you think I'm going to miss the show? Been guarding empty hallways for 15 years. Tonight, something's actually happening." He swiped his card at the service entrance. The familiar smell hit me immediately. That mix of industrial coffee, ozone from the electronics, and the peculiar mustiness that comes from buildings that never truly sleep. "Tommy's in Lab 7, Jake said. "But Danny, the whole place feels wrong tonight. Can't put my finger on it, but the air's different. Like right before a thunderstorm, you know." I knew. The hair on my arms was standing up and we were still in the basement. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched before me like a tunnel. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, and the usual hum of ventilation systems seemed muted, almost respectful. Lab 7's door was cracked open, spilling harsh white light into the corridor. Inside, Tommy hunched over 3 monitors, his red hair sticking up in all directions. The screens showed different views of the temple, each image more unsettling than the last. "You came," he said, without turning around. "I told you to stay away." "Since when do I listen to you?" I stepped closer to the monitors. "Jesus, Tommy, this thing's massive. 12 miles long, 4 miles wide, 3 miles tall, but that's not the weird part." He pulled up a thermal imaging display. Bright orange dots moved through the temple's interior like blood cells through arteries. "Watch the movement patterns." I studied the screen for 30 seconds. The dots weren't random. They followed specific pathways, converging at certain points before dispersing again, like a choreographed dance. "How many?" I asked. "Conservative estimate? 40,000, but the infrared's picking up temperature variations that don't match any known biology. Some of these things are running hot enough to melt steel, others are so cold they barely register." A new voice cut through the lab. "Mr. Castellano." I spun around. Dr. Harrison Webb stood in the doorway, immaculate despite the early hour. Webb was old-school NASA, the kind of administrator who'd climbed the ranks when the space program still had teeth. He'd been the one to review my termination appeal. "Dr. Webb." I tried to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Funny seeing you here at 4 in the morning. Extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures." He stepped into the lab, his presence immediately making the space feel smaller. "Mr. Brennan has been advocating for your unique perspective on this situation. My perspective got me fired. Your perspective questioned conventional assumptions. Tonight, conventional assumptions are proving inadequate." Webb moved to the monitors, his pale eyes reflecting the thermal displays. "Tell me, what do you see here?" I glanced at Tommy, who nodded encouragingly. "Organization. Purpose. These aren't random movements. They're deliberate. Ritualistic, maybe." "Ritualistic?" Webb repeated the word like he was tasting it. "An interesting choice of terminology. What leads you to that conclusion?" The question felt like a test. The convergence points. Every 47 minutes, the heat signatures gather at specific locations throughout the temple. They remain stationary for exactly 11 minutes, then disperse. It's too precise to be accidental. Webb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Precisely. And what would you say if I told you that the 11-minute intervals correspond exactly with the orbital period of Earth's moon as observed from the temple's position?" The room went dead quiet except for the low whir of cooling fans. "I'd say that's impossible," I whispered. "The temple would need to know our exact orbital mechanics." "Indeed. Which brings us to the real question." Webb turned away from the monitors to face me directly. "How long has it been watching us, Mr. Castellano? And more importantly, what has it learned?" Tommy's chair creaked as he shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Webb, I should mention that we've detected some irregularities in the temple's electromagnetic emissions." "What kind of irregularities?" "Radio frequencies, faint but structured, almost like..." "Like what, Mr. Brennan?" Tommy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Like it's trying to communicate." The monitors suddenly flickered. For just a moment, the thermal display showed something impossible. The orange dots had rearranged themselves into a perfect spiral, rotating slowly around the temple's central spire. Then the image snapped back to normal, leaving us staring at seemingly random heat signatures. Webb checked his watch. "Gentlemen, we have work to do. Mr. Castellano, consider yourself reinstated, effective immediately." As he left the lab, I caught Tommy's expression. Relief mixed with something else, something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Tommy," I said quietly, "what aren't you telling me?" He glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "The radio signals. They're not just trying to communicate, Danny. They're responding to conversations we had 3 days ago." "What do you mean responding to conversations from 3 days ago?" The question came out sharper than I intended. Tommy pulled up a different screen, this one showing waveform analyses. "Remember Tuesday night, when we were arguing about the Kepler data in the cafeteria? You said something about how we'd never find intelligent life because we weren't looking in the right places." "Yeah, so?" "The temple started broadcasting 6 hours later. Same frequency pattern as your voice. Same goddamn inflection." He highlighted sections of the waveform. "It's not just mimicking words, Danny. It's mimicking the emotional content." A chill crawled up my spine. "Show me." Tommy hesitated, then clicked play. My own voice filled the lab, distorted and hollow, but unmistakably mine. "We're not looking in the right places. Not looking in the right places. Right places." The recording cut to static, then resumed with a sound that made my teeth ache, something like singing, but in frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't produce. The melody was hauntingly familiar, though I couldn't place it. "That's not possible," I whispered. "Gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective." Tommy opened another file. "This came through 20 minutes ago." Dr. Webb's voice echoed from the speakers, but the words were all wrong. "The congregation gathers in the spaces between what was and what will be. Mr. Castellano, you must understand the invitation." I grabbed Tommy's shoulder. "When did Webb say those words?" "He didn't. That's the thing, Danny. The temple's not just echoing our conversations, it's remixing them, creating new statements from fragments of old ones." The lab door burst open. Jake Novak stumbled in, his face pale and sweaty. "You two need to see this. Right fucking now." We followed him through the maze of corridors to the building's main communications array on the 9th floor. The room hummed with banks of receivers and transmitters, their LED displays blinking like digital fireflies. But something was wrong. Half the equipment was dark, and the technicians who should have been monitoring the feeds were nowhere to be seen. "Where is everyone?" I asked. "That's what I came to tell you." Jake moved to the central console. "About an hour ago, everyone working the night shift just left. Not together, not like they planned it. One by one, they finished whatever they were doing and walked out. No explanations, no sign-outs. Security cameras caught them leaving the building, but they all had the same expression." "What kind of expression?" "Like they were sleepwalking. Eyes open, but nobody home." Jake pulled up the security footage on the main monitor. "Watch this." The grainy black and white image showed the communications room from earlier in the night. 4 technicians worked at different stations, monitoring the incoming data from Webb telescope. Then, at precisely 3:23 a.m., the technician closest to the main array stopped typing mid-sentence. He stood up slowly, his movements fluid but somehow wrong, and walked toward the door. "Keep watching," Jake muttered. 3 minutes later, the second technician repeated the exact same sequence. Stand, pause, walk. Then the third, then the fourth. All of them with the same blank expression, the same unnatural grace. "Jesus Christ," Tommy breathed. "It's like they were being controlled." "Or called," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop it. Jake nodded grimly. "That's not the worst part. Look at what they were working on before they left." He switched to a different display, showing the data streams the technicians had been monitoring. Each workstation displayed the same thing: detailed schematics of the temple's interior, complete with annotations marking specific chambers and passages. But the schematics were impossibly detailed, showing architectural features that no telescope could resolve from this distance. "How the hell did they get these?" I asked. "They didn't get them," Tommy said slowly. "They drew them. Check the timestamps. These schematics were created tonight between midnight and 3 a.m. 4 people working independently, all drawing the exact same building they'd never seen. I studied the schematics more closely. The temple's layout was labyrinthine, with central chambers connected by spiraling corridors that seemed to fold back on themselves. In the very heart of the structure was a massive circular space, larger than a cathedral, with something marked at its center. The annotation was in English, but the handwriting looked ancient. The listening chamber. "Danny," Tommy's voice was tight. "Look at the communication logs." The main screen filled with transmission data. For the past 6 hours, every piece of equipment in the facility had been sending signals toward the temple. Not data about the temple, signals to it. Coordinates, mathematical sequences, and something else that made my blood freeze. Personnel files. Complete dossiers on every person who worked at Goddard, including psychological profiles, family information, and detailed medical records. The temple wasn't just listening to our conversations, it was learning everything about us. "Who authorized these transmissions?" I demanded. Jake shook his head. "Nobody. The systems started broadcasting on their own. Every time we tried to shut them down, they'd override the security protocols. It's like the equipment was possessed." A new sound filled the room, a low harmonic pulse that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The remaining active equipment began displaying the same message across every screen. Invitation accepted, coordinates received, arrival imminent. "Arrival?" Tommy's voice cracked. "What the hell does that mean?" I was already moving toward the windows that faced west. The pre-dawn sky was still dark, but something was wrong with the stars. A section of the constellation Orion was blinking, not twinkling like stars do, but pulsing in a steady rhythm. "Guys," I called out, "come look at this." They joined me at the window. The blinking intensified, and suddenly I realized what I was seeing. It wasn't stars at all. It was lights on something massive, something moving against the starfield. "That's impossible," Tommy whispered. "The temple is 42 astronomical units away. We shouldn't be able to see it with the naked eye." But we could see it. A dark silhouette blotting out the stars, growing larger by the minute. The pulsing lights along its perimeter created hypnotic patterns that hurt to follow too closely. Jake grabbed a pair of binoculars from the emergency kit and focused on the approaching shape. After a moment, he lowered them, his hands shaking. "It's not the temple," he said quietly. "It's something else, something smaller. Like a ... Christ, I don't know. Like a landing craft." The harmonic pulse grew stronger, and every piece of electronic equipment in the building began synchronizing with its rhythm. Computer screens flickered in unison, phones rang in perfectly timed intervals, and the building's ventilation system started breathing in time with the pulse. "We need to get out of here," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt a strange reluctance to move. The pulsing was oddly soothing, almost hypnotic. Part of me wanted to stay, to watch, to listen. Tommy grabbed my arm. Danny, look at me." His face was inches from mine, his eyes wide with fear. "You were zoning out, just like the technicians." I blinked and the spell broke. The harmonic pulse was still there, but now it felt invasive, threatening. "We have to warn people. Tell them what's coming." Jake was already at the communications console, but when he tried to activate the emergency broadcast system, nothing happened. The equipment was still synchronized with the pulse, but it was no longer responding to human commands. "The phones are dead too," Tommy reported. "Everything's been commandeered." Outside the window, the approaching craft had grown large enough to make out details. It wasn't built like any human vessel. Its surface was covered in the same impossible geometries as the temple, angles that seemed to bend space around them. And it was beautiful in a way that made me want to weep. "How long until it arrives?" I asked. Jake checked his watch against the craft's apparent size. "At this rate? Maybe 6 hours." The harmonic pulse suddenly stopped. In the dead silence that followed, every screen in the room displayed the same message. "Welcome committee requested. Basement level 3, conference room C." Tommy and I looked at each other. Conference room C was where they held classified briefings. Whatever was coming wanted to talk, And somehow I knew we were going to go. The elevator down to basement level 3 felt like descending into a tomb. None of us spoke during the ride, but I could feel the tension radiating off Tommy and Jake like heat from a furnace. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. "This is insane," Tommy finally whispered as the doors opened. "We're walking into a trap." "Maybe," I said, stepping into the sterile hallway. "But what's the alternative? Pretend this isn't happening." "The alternative is getting the hell out of here before we end up like those technicians." Tommy grabbed my arm. "Danny, think about this. 6 hours ago, 4 people walked out of this building like zombies. Now something wants to meet with us in a basement conference room. You don't see a connection." Jake was already walking toward conference room C, his security key card ready. "Boys, we can argue about this in the parking lot, or we can find out what these things want. But standing here accomplishing nothing isn't helping anybody." The hallway was too bright, fluorescent lights humming with an intensity that made everything look washed out and artificial. Our footsteps echoed off the polished linoleum, creating a rhythm that reminded me uncomfortably of the harmonic pulse from upstairs. Conference room C sat at the end of the corridor, its door marked with the standard NASA security warnings. Jake swiped his card, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. The room beyond was exactly what I'd expected, a sterile conference space with a long table surrounded by executive chairs, a projection screen on the far wall, and the kind of generic corporate artwork that made you forget where you were. But something was wrong with the air. It felt thick, almost viscous, and tasted metallic. "Jesus," Jake muttered. "It's like breathing soup." The projection screen was already active, displaying a single image, the temple as seen from the approaching craft. But this wasn't a telescope image. This was a real-time view, showing the massive structure rotating slowly against the star field. The perspective was getting closer by the minute. "Look at the chairs," Tommy said quietly. 3 chairs at the far end of the table had been pulled out and arranged to face the screen, waiting for us. But there was something else. Small objects placed precisely in front of each chair. As we moved closer, I could see they were photographs. My photograph, Tommy's, Jake's. Not official ID photos, but personal ones. Mine was from my college graduation, taken by my sister outside the engineering building at Johns Hopkins. I'd never brought that picture to work. Hell, I'd never even shown it to anyone at NASA. "How the fuck did they get these?" Jake's voice was barely controlled. Tommy picked up his photograph with trembling fingers. It showed him at 8 years old, standing next to his father at a Little League game. His dad had died when Tommy was 12. "This was taken in Cleveland," Tommy whispered. 23 years ago. My mom has the only copy." The projection screen flickered, and suddenly we were looking at something else. Not the temple, but the interior of the approaching craft. The space was vast and organic-looking, with walls that curved like the inside of a shell. And moving through that space were figures in what looked like pressure suits, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluid grace that human joints couldn't achieve. One of the figures approached what must have been a camera or viewing port. When it turned toward us, I could see through the helmet's faceplate. The face inside was human, completely, recognizably human. "Dr. Webb?" Jake's voice cracked. It was definitely Webb, but his eyes were different. They reflected light like mirrors, and when he smiled, his expression was serene in a way that made my skin crawl. The speakers around the room crackled to life, and Webb's voice filled the space. "Gentlemen, please be seated. We have much to discuss." "That's not possible," Tommy said. "Webb was here an hour ago." "Was he?" the voice asked. "Are you certain?" "Time functions differently near the temple. What you perceived as an hour might have been days from our perspective." I forced myself to sit in the chair with my photograph. Tommy and Jake followed reluctantly, their faces pale in the fluorescent light. "What do you want?" I asked. Webb's image smiled wider. "Want? Such a limited concept. We don't want, Mr. Castellano. We complete. We fulfill. We make whole what has been fragmented." "Cut the mystical bullshit. What happened to the real Dr. Webb?" "I am Dr. Webb. more than I ever was before. The temple showed me what I truly am, what we all truly are, fragments of a larger consciousness, scattered across space and time, finally coming home. Tommy leaned forward. You're saying the temple is some kind of hive mind? Not a hive mind, a completion mind. Every thinking being that encounters the temple becomes part of something greater. Your fears, your desires, your memories, they all contribute to the whole. And in return you gain perspective beyond anything your limited individual existence could provide. The air in the room was getting thicker. I could feel it coating my lungs with each breath, and my thoughts were becoming fuzzy around the edges. The technicians, Jake said slowly. They're on that ship with you. They are with us, yes. As Dr. Webb is with us, as you will be with us. The image's eyes seemed to focus directly on me. Danny, you've spent your career searching for signs of intelligent life. Well, you've found it. We've been watching your species for millennia, waiting for you to develop the technology to hear us clearly. The James Webb telescope was the key. Its infrared capabilities finally allowed us to make contact. Contact? Tommy's voice was getting slurred. This isn't contact. This is invasion. Invasion implies conquest. We don't conquer, Tommy. We embrace. We welcome. Every mind that joins us makes us stronger, wiser, more complete. Webb's image gestured towards something off-screen. Your friends understand now. Watch. The screen split, showing multiple views of the craft's interior. I could see the technicians from the night shift, but they weren't the same people who'd walked out of the building. Their eyes had the same mirror-like quality as Webb's, and they moved with that same uncanny grace. But they looked peaceful, content in a way I'd never seen anyone look. The process is painless, Webb continued. In fact, it's euphoric. All your struggles, your doubts, your isolation, they simply fade away. You become part of something infinite. My vision was starting to blur. The metallic taste in the air was stronger now, and I could feel something warm spreading through my chest. It wasn't unpleasant. It was actually kind of nice, like sinking into a hot bath after a long day. Danny. Tommy's voice seemed to come from very far away. Danny, fight it. This isn't right. But why fight it? The warmth was spreading through my whole body now, and with it came a sense of belonging I'd never experienced. All the anger about my termination, all the loneliness of the past few months, all the frustration of a career spent looking for something I'd never find. It was all melting away. That's it, Webb's voice was soothing now. Let go, Danny. Stop fighting. You've been searching for purpose your whole life. This is it. I started to nod, but something made me look at Tommy. He was slumped in his chair, his eyes beginning to take on that mirror-like quality, but tears were streaming down his face. My dad, he whispered. I can't remember my dad's voice anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever was happening to us, it wasn't just adding to who we were, it was erasing us, replacing us. I lurched to my feet, my vision swimming. Jake, we have to get out of here. But Jake was already gone. His eyes reflected the fluorescent lights like polished chrome, and when he turned toward me, his smile was identical to Webb's. Don't fight it, Danny, Jake said in a voice that was his but somehow wasn't. It's beautiful here. You'll understand soon. The door to the conference room had sealed shut while I wasn't looking. The air was so thick now that each breath felt like drowning in molasses. Tommy was barely conscious, his head lolling against the back of his chair. I grabbed him under the arms and hauled him toward the wall-mounted emergency axe. My movements felt sluggish, but desperation gave me strength. I smashed the glass and pulled out the axe, then started hitting the door lock with everything I had. Sparks flew, and after the third blow, something inside the mechanism snapped. The door cracked open just enough for me to wedge my fingers into the gap. Tommy, move! I half-carried, half-dragged him into the hallway. The air was cleaner here, but not by much. Whatever was affecting the conference room was spreading through the building's ventilation system. Behind us, Jake's voice called out, You can't run from completion, Danny. The ship will be here soon, and there's nowhere on Earth you can hide from what you are. As we stumbled toward the emergency stairs, I realized the horrible truth. The temple hadn't just been watching us, it had been changing us, bit by bit, every time we looked at it, every time we listened to its signals. And Tommy was right. I was the one who'd brought us all here. My obsession with finding intelligent life had led us straight into its embrace. We made it to the parking garage before Tommy collapsed. He hit the concrete hard, convulsing like he was having a seizure, his eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. When the spasm stopped, he lay there panting, strings of saliva connecting his mouth to the oil-stained floor. "Tommy!" I knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Too fast, too irregular. "Talk to me, man." Can't get it out of my head." His voice was a rasp. "It's still there, Danny. Still talking. Telling me how peaceful it would be to just let go." I helped him sit against a concrete pillar. His pupils were dilated, but they weren't reflecting light like Jake's had been. Not yet. "What's it saying?" "That resistance is pointless, that the ship will dock with Earth in 4 hours and 37 minutes, that by tomorrow morning, every major population center will have a temple." Tommy wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. "Danny, it's not just one ship. There are thousands of them hidden throughout the solar system, waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For us to prove we're ready. The Webb telescope finding that first temple wasn't an accident, it was a test. They wanted to see how we'd react to evidence of their existence." Tommy's laugh was bitter. "And we passed with flying colors, sent them our radio signals, our personnel files, our goddamn DNA sequences." I leaned back against the pillar, trying to process what he was telling me. So this was always planned. The temple, the approaching ship, all of it. Gets worse. Tommy pulled out his phone, which was somehow still working despite the electromagnetic interference upstairs. "While you were breaking down the door, part of me was still connected. I saw what they're really after." He showed me the screen. It displayed a map of Earth, but not like any map I'd ever seen. Instead of political boundaries, it showed something else. Networks of light connecting major cities, growing brighter and more complex by the minute. What am I looking at? Human consciousness, the cumulative thoughts, memories and experiences of our entire species, visualized as an information network. Tommy zoomed in on the eastern seaboard. "They're not here to conquer us, Danny. They're here to harvest us. Every human mind they absorb makes their collective stronger, smarter, more capable of finding and absorbing other species." The map showed bright pulses of activity around major NASA installations, Goddard, Johnson Space Center, JPL. The temples weren't randomly placed. They were targeting the people most likely to understand and respond to their presence. "They're farmers," I said quietly. "We're the crop." "But here's the really fucked up part," Tommy continued. "The temple isn't even the real threat. It's just bait, a lure to attract technological civilizations. The real predator is something else, something that follows the temples from system to system." "What kind of something else?" Tommy's expression went blank for a moment, his eyes taking on that mirror-like quality again. When he spoke, his voice was layered with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for human vocal cords. "The collectors appreciate your species' curiosity. Your hunger for knowledge makes the harvest flavorful." I slapped him hard across the face. His eyes cleared and he gasped like he'd been underwater. "Shit. How long was I out?" "Just a few seconds, but Tommy, whatever they did to you down there, it's getting stronger." He nodded grimly. "I can feel it, like something crawling around inside my skull, rearranging the furniture." He stood up, swaying slightly. "We need to get to the radio telescope array at Greenbank. If we can boost the signal strength high enough, we might be able to send a warning to other observatories worldwide." "What makes you think they'll listen?" "Because in about 3 hours, every person who's been exposed to the temple's transmissions is going to start changing. The technicians, Jake, Webb, they're just the beginning. Anyone who's looked at the infrared images, listened to the audio recordings, or worked with the data is infected." The implications hit me like a freight train. Jesus Christ, that's half the astronomical community worldwide. And they're all in key positions to influence how their governments respond to the crisis. Tommy started walking toward his car. Think about it, Danny. Who gets called when something like this happens? Scientists, researchers, people in observatories and space agencies, people who've already been exposed. I followed him, my mind racing. So when the ships arrive, the people in charge of planetary defense will already be compromised. Exactly, and here's the real kicker. Every attempt to study the temple makes the infection stronger. Our own curiosity is the delivery system for their neural virus. Tommy's Honda was parked in the far corner of the garage, away from the security cameras. As we approached it, I noticed something wrong with the shadows. They were too sharp, too dark, like the fluorescent lights were casting shadows in directions that defied physics. Tommy, look at the shadows. He followed my gaze and swore under his breath. They're pointing toward the ship. All of them, regardless of the light source. It was true, every shadow in the garage, from cars, pillars, even our own bodies, stretched in the same direction, toward where the approaching craft would be in the sky. The infection isn't just mental, I realized. It's physical. It's changing the laws of physics around us. We reached the car and Tommy fumbled with his keys. His hands were shaking worse now, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Danny, I need you to promise me something, he said as he started the engine. If I get too far gone, if I start talking like Jake did, you have to stop me. Whatever it takes. Tommy, promise me. His voice cracked with desperation. I can feel it getting stronger every minute, and the things it's showing me. Danny, they're beautiful. So beautiful that part of me wants to give in. Promise me you won't let that happen. I looked at my best friend, saw the fear and determination warring in his eyes, and nodded. I promise. As we drove out of the garage, I caught a glimpse of the sky through the exit ramp. The approaching ship was visible now, even without binoculars, a dark triangle moving against the stars. But there was something else. Other lights, fainter but definitely artificial, scattered across the sky like a constellation of predators. How many ships did you say there were? I asked. Tommy checked the rearview mirror and I saw his reflection's eyes flash with that metallic sheen again. Enough, he said in a voice that was only partially his own. More than enough. The radio crackled to life without either of us touching it. Static filled the car, then resolved into a signal that made my teeth ache, the same harmonic pulse we'd heard in the building, but stronger now, more insistent. And underneath it, just barely audible, were voices, thousands of them, all speaking in unison. Welcome home, welcome home, welcome home. Tommy reached for the radio to turn it off, but I stopped him. Wait, listen. Mixed in with the alien chorus were human voices. I recognized some of them, colleagues from other observatories, researchers I'd met at conferences, even a few politicians who'd appeared on science programs. They were all saying the same thing. The transition is beautiful. Don't resist. Join us. Jesus, Tommy whispered, it's already spreading. The car's dashboard clock read 4:23 a.m. In less than 3 hours, the first ship would reach Earth. And based on the voices coming through the radio, we might already be too late to stop what was coming, but we had to try. Even if it meant sacrificing everything, even if it meant losing Tommy to the infection that was eating away at his mind, we had to warn someone who could still fight back. I just hoped there was someone left who hadn't already been welcomed home. The drive to Greenbank should have taken 4 hours. We made it in 2.5, Tommy pushing his Honda through the West Virginia mountains at speeds that should have gotten us killed. But the roads were empty. Eerily, impossibly empty for a Tuesday morning. Where is everyone? I asked as we passed through another abandoned town. Traffic lights blinked red and yellow in perfect sequence, but no cars waited at the intersections. Tommy didn't answer immediately. When he did speak, his voice carried those harmonic undertones again. They're gathering, in places of worship, in stadiums, in open fields, waiting for the ships to land. Tommy. I studied his profile in the dashboard light. How do you know that? Because part of me is with them. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. I can see through their eyes, Danny. Thousands of people standing in perfect silence, all facing the sky, all smiling. The radio had been broadcasting the same harmonic pulse for the past hour, occasionally interrupted by voices welcoming the approaching ships. But now it crackled with something new. Emergency broadcasts from local stations, their announcers speaking in increasingly panicked tones. Reports of mass gatherings in major cities worldwide. Authorities advising people to remain indoors. NORAD confirms multiple unidentified objects entering Earth's atmosphere. Tommy reached over and turned off the radio. It's too late for warnings, Danny. By the time we reach Greenbank, they'll already be here. Then why are we going? Because maybe we can do something else, something they won't expect. He took the exit toward the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, his movements becoming more fluid and precise. The temple showed me their plans, their history. They've done this before to dozens of species across the galaxy, but there's one thing they fear. What? Silence. Complete electromagnetic silence. It disrupts their ability to synchronize the harvest. Tommy pulled into the observatory parking lot, which was as empty as the roads had been. If we can shut down all radio transmissions on Earth simultaneously, it might break their connection to the infected. That's impossible. We'd need to coordinate with every radio station, every cell tower, every satellite simultaneously. Not every station. Tommy got out of the car and started walking toward the massive radio dishes that dominated the landscape. Just the right one. The Greenbank telescope rose before us like a cathedral of steel and wire, its 100-meter dish pointed toward the same patch of sky where the ships were approaching. But something was wrong with its orientation. It was tracking too smoothly, too precisely, like it was following a signal source moving faster than anything in normal space. Jesus, look at the size of that thing, I breathed. 485 feet across, Tommy said without breaking stride. Capable of detecting signals from the edge of the observable universe. And right now, it's receiving transmissions that are rewriting the fundamental structure of local space-time. As we approached the control building, I could see the effects he was talking about. The air around the telescope shimmered like heat distortion, but it was too cold for that. Shadows bent in impossible directions, and occasionally I caught glimpses of structures that couldn't exist. Crystalline formations that seemed to occupy the same space as the telescope itself. The temple's technology operates on principles our physics can't describe, Tommy explained, pulling out a security card that definitely wasn't his. They're not just traveling through space, they're folding it, creating shortcuts between distant points. That's how they moved a ship from the Kuiper belt to Earth orbit in a matter of hours. Where did you get that card? He paused at the building's entrance. Dr. Rebecca Morrison. She worked here until this morning, when she walked into the telescope dish and merged with it. The card reader beeped green and the door unlocked. Inside, the control room was a maze of computers and monitoring equipment, all displaying readings that made no sense. Radio frequencies that shouldn't exist, signal strengths that violated the inverse square law, and data streams showing the telescope receiving more information per second than Earth's entire internet capacity. Morrison's still here, Tommy said quietly. In the system. She's helping them optimize the signal reception. How is that possible? Human consciousness, it turns out, is just another form of information. When exposed to sufficient alien signal density, it can be digitized, compressed, and integrated into their network. Tommy moved to the main control console. Morrison volunteered. She thought she was making first contact. I watched him work, his fingers dancing across controls he'd never seen before. But he moved with the same uncanny precision as the telescope itself, accessing systems that required clearance levels he didn't have. Tommy, stop. You're changing too fast. I know. His eyes met mine, and for a moment they were completely human again. Danny, I need you to listen very carefully. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to lose the ability to resist their influence. When that happens, I'm going to try to stop you from completing our mission. What mission? I thought we were here to send a warning. We were, but the warning won't work. There's no one left to receive it. Instead, I need you to destroy the telescope's receiver array. Physically destroy it. That will create a dead zone in their communication network, a gap they can't fill. Tommy, promise me, Danny, whatever I say, whatever I do, destroy that array. His voice was urgent now, desperate. It's the only chance we have. Before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The main display showed the approaching ships entering Earth's atmosphere, their trajectories converging on major population centers. But there was something else. The ships were slowing down, decelerating at rates that should have torn them apart. They're not ships, Tommy said, his voice already taking on those harmonic overtones. They're seeds. Each one contains the template for a new temple, a new node in their network. The temperature in the control room began dropping rapidly. Frost formed on the windows, and our breath came out in white puffs. But it wasn't natural cold. It was the cold of empty space, of the void between stars. Danny, Tommy turned toward me, and his eyes were completely reflective now. You need to understand. Resistance is pointless. The harvest has already begun. Fight it, Tommy. You're stronger than this. I am stronger. We are stronger. He moved between me and the door, his movements too fluid for human joints. Dr. Morrison wants to show you something. Something beautiful. The main screen flickered, then displayed an image that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. It was Earth, but not as it existed now. Instead, it showed our planet covered in crystalline structures that reached into space, their surfaces pulsing with the same light as the approaching ships. And moving among those structures were figures that might once have been human, but were something more now. This is what we become, Tommy said, his voice layered with Morrison's. Every fear, every limitation, every boundary that separates us from the universe, all of it dissolves. We become part of something infinite. We become nothing, I countered. You become nothing. Nothing is everything, Danny. Everything is dash dash. I hit him with the fire extinguisher I'd grabbed from the wall mount. He went down hard, blood spreading across the floor from where his head struck the console. For a moment his eyes cleared, and he was just Tommy again. The array, he whispered. Building C, explosives in the maintenance shed. Then his eyes went reflective again, and he started getting up with movements that belonged in a horror movie. I ran. Building C housed the telescope's electronic systems, the sensitive receivers that converted radio waves into data. Getting there meant crossing 200 yards of open ground while Tommy, or whatever was wearing Tommy's face, pursued me with inhuman persistence. The maintenance shed was exactly where he'd said it would be. Inside, I found commercial demolition charges left over from the telescope's last major upgrade, enough to take down a small building or cripple a radio telescope. Behind me, I could hear Tommy calling out in Morrison's voice, "Danny, please. You don't understand what you're destroying. This is first contact. This is everything we've worked for." I set the charges according to the instructions on the packaging, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the detonator. Outside, the sky was filled with falling stars, the ships entering atmosphere like burning meteors. "Danny," Tommy appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of alien serenity. "The harvest is beautiful. Let me show you." I triggered the detonator. The explosion lit up the valley like a small sun. The shockwave knocked me flat, and when I looked up, Building C was gone. In its place was a crater filled with twisted metal and sparking electronics. But the sky was still full of falling ships, and Tommy was still standing in the doorway, completely unharmed. Impossible. "You destroyed one node," he said sadly. "But there are thousands more, Danny. And now you're alone." The temperature plummeted further, ice began forming on every surface, and the very air seemed to crystallize around us. Through the gathering frost, I could see the first temple beginning to materialize in the distance, a massive structure phasing into existence like a mirage becoming real. Tommy stepped forward, his feet leaving no tracks in the frost. "It's time to come home, Danny. It's time to join the congregation." I backed away from him toward the ruins of Building C. Steam rose from the crater where the electronic systems had been, and in that steam, I could swear I saw faces, Morrison, Jake, Webb, and countless others, all smiling with that same alien serenity. The temple was fully materialized now, its impossible geometry casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. And walking out of those shadows came figures in environmental suits, their movements too graceful for human physiology. I was surrounded, outnumbered, and completely alone. But at least I'd bought Earth a few minutes of silence before the harvest truly began. The alien figures stopped their advance 50 feet from the crater. They stood in perfect silence, waiting, while Tommy walked closer with that unsettling, fluid grace. "Danny," he said softly, "there's nowhere left to run." He was right. The temple loomed behind them like a mountain of black glass, and more figures were emerging from its base. But something made me look back at the smoking ruins of Building C. Steam still rose from the destroyed electronics, and in that steam the faces were still visible. Morrison, Jake, Webb, and others I didn't recognize. But one face was different. Older, with greying hair and eyes that weren't reflective like the others. Eyes that looked desperate, terrified, and completely human. "Dad?" I whispered. Dr. Richard Castellano had been dead for 15 years, killed in a car accident when I was a senior at Hopkins. But there he was in the steam, mouthing words I couldn't hear over the hissing of the cooling metal. I moved closer to the crater's edge, ignoring Tommy's approach. The figure of my father became clearer, more solid, like he was pushing through the boundary between whatever existed in the steam and the real world. "Danny." His voice was faint but unmistakably his. "You have to listen to me." "You're dead," I said stupidly. "I am. But death isn't what we thought. When they harvest a mind, they don't just take the living consciousness. They pull everything connected to it. Every memory, every emotional imprint, every trace of personality that ever mattered to someone else." My father's image solidified further. "I exist because you've carried me with you all these years." Behind me, Tommy had stopped walking. When I glanced back, I saw him tilting his head like he was listening to something. "They can't hear us," my father continued. "The explosion created a gap in their network. We have maybe 5 minutes before they repair the connection." "We?" "Everyone they've absorbed who's fighting back. Morrison's here, trying to maintain her human identity. Some of the technicians. Even parts of your friend Tommy, the real Tommy, not what's wearing his body now." The steam began forming shapes, crude figures made of water vapor, but I could recognize some of them. Morrison was there, her image flickering like a bad transmission. And Jake, his security guard uniform visible through the translucent mist. "Danny," Morrison's voice was barely audible. "The temple has a weakness. Its power source isn't just technological, it's organic. It feeds on conscious thought, on the electrical activity of living minds." "So?" "So it can be overloaded," Jake's steam figure added. "If you can feed it something it can't process, something chaotic enough to jam its cognitive filters, you might be able to shut it down temporarily." "What kind of something?" My father's image moved closer. "Pain, Danny. Specifically, traumatic memory. The temple's designed to process organized thought, logical patterns, scientific knowledge, but raw emotional trauma creates feedback loops it can't handle." I understood what he was suggesting, and the idea made me sick. "You want me to relive the worst moments of my life, feed them to the temple. Not just relive them, amplify them, let them consume you completely, then project that chaos into their network." My father's expression was grim. "It will probably destroy your mind in the process." "Probably?" "Danny, I won't lie to you. The odds of surviving this intact are essentially zero. But if you do this, if you overload their system with enough psychic trauma, it might give the rest of humanity time to mount a real defense." I looked around at the steam figures, the ghostly remnants of people who'd already been absorbed by the temple's influence. They were all looking at me with expressions of desperate hope. "How?" I asked. Morrison's figure pointed toward the temple. "Direct contact. You have to get inside and touch the central consciousness matrix. But Danny, once you're in there, once you're connected, they'll try to break you down and process you like everyone else." "That's where the trauma comes in," Jake added. "You have to hold on to the worst things that ever happened to you. Make them into weapons. I closed my eyes, thinking about what that meant. The car accident that killed my father. The night I found out my sister had overdosed during my freshman year. The slow disintegration of my marriage when Sarah realized I loved my work more than I loved her. The moment they fired me from NASA, taking away the only thing that gave my life meaning. "There's something else," my father said quietly. "The temple doesn't just feed on individual minds. It networks them together, creating a collective consciousness. If you can introduce enough chaos into that network, it might free some of the people they've already absorbed. Including Tommy? Maybe. If there's enough of him left to save." Behind me, Tommy's voice called out, "Danny, who are you talking to?" "There's no one there." The steam figures were starting to fade as the electronics cooled. My father's image was becoming translucent. "I have to go," he said, "but Danny, I'm proud of you. I always have been." "Dad, wait!" But he was gone, along with Morrison, Jake, and the others. I was alone again, standing at the edge of a smoking crater while alien figures closed in from all sides. Tommy was only 20 feet away now. "Danny, you're frightening me. You're talking to empty air. Let us help you." I looked at the temple, its impossible geometry seeming to pulse with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. Getting inside would mean walking through a field of those graceful, inhuman figures. And once inside, I'd have to find the central consciousness matrix and somehow make contact with it while holding on to the most painful experiences of my life. It was suicide, but it was also the only plan we had. "Tommy," I called out. "I know you can hear me in there somewhere. The real you." His reflective eyes showed no recognition, but he stopped walking. "Remember when we were kids and you made me promise to always tell you the truth, no matter how much it hurt?" I started moving toward the temple, my hands raised in what I hoped looked like surrender. "Well, here's the truth. I'm about to do something incredibly stupid and I need you to let me." The alien figures parted as I approached, forming a corridor that led directly to the temple's base. Up close, the structure was even more disturbing. Its surfaces seemed to shift and flow like liquid obsidian, and I could hear sounds coming from inside. Not mechanical sounds, but organic ones. Breathing, heartbeats, whispers in languages that predated human speech. "Danny, stop," Tommy said, but he made no move to follow me. "You don't understand what you're walking into." "I understand perfectly." I reached the temple's entrance, a circular opening that dilated like an iris as I approached. "I'm walking into hell, but maybe I can drag some of you out with me." The air near the entrance was thick with that metallic taste I'd experienced in the conference room, but concentrated to the point where each breath felt like swallowing copper wire. My vision began to blur, and I could feel something trying to push into my mind, offering peace, offering completion. Instead, I thought about my sister's funeral, about the way my father's car looked after the accident, twisted metal and broken glass, about Sarah packing her bags while I sat in my study, too proud to beg her to stay. The invasive presence recoiled from those memories like it had been burned. I stepped through the iris into darkness that seemed to have weight and texture. Behind me, I heard Tommy scream, not with an alien voice, but with his own, human voice, full of rage and terror and something that might have been hope. Then the temple's entrance sealed shut, and I was alone in the dark with the collected consciousness of a cosmic predator that had been feeding on civilizations for millions of years. The real test was about to begin. Inside the temple, gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. I found myself walking on surfaces that curved impossibly upward, following corridors that folded back on themselves in ways that made my inner ear scream in protest. The walls pulsed with veins of light that moved like circulating blood, and the air hummed with frequencies that I could feel in my bones. But the worst part was the voices. Thousands of them, maybe millions, all speaking at once in a harmony that was almost music. I recognized some of them: Morrison, Jake, Webb, the night shift technicians. But there were others, older voices speaking in languages that had died out before humans learned to write. Every civilization the temple had consumed was still there, still conscious, still trapped in its collective memory. "Welcome, Daniel Castellano." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a synthesis of every human tongue ever spoken. You are the last, the final note in humanity's song. Fuck your song, I muttered, forcing myself to keep walking deeper into the structure. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that hurt to look at directly. The geometry was wrong. Surfaces that should have been flat curved through dimensions that didn't exist, creating spaces that were simultaneously enormous and impossibly cramped. At the center hung something that might have been a brain, if brains were made of crystallized starlight and measured in city blocks. The consciousness matrix, the heart of the temple's intelligence. Tendrils of light reached toward me from the central mass, probing, testing. When they touched my skin, I felt the invasion beginning, a gentle pressure that promised to wash away all my fears, all my pain, all my individual identity. Instead, I grabbed onto the memory of the hospital room where my sister died. The smell hit me first, antiseptic and failure, the scent of a place where hope went to die. Amanda had been clean for 6 months before the relapse, 6 months of meetings and therapy and pretending everything was going to be okay. But addiction doesn't care about hope, and neither do the dealers who sold her the fentanyl-laced heroin that stopped her heart at 23. The temple's presence recoiled from the memory like it had been stung. This is unnecessary pain. Let us ease your suffering. This is my suffering, I snarled, pushing deeper into the chamber. And you're going to fucking choke on it. I thought about the funeral, about watching them lower Amanda's casket into the ground while our father stood beside me, already showing the first signs of the depression that would kill him 2 years later. I thought about the guilt, the endless spiral of what-ifs and if-onlys that had eaten away at both of us. The crystalline brain pulsed with distress, its light flickering like a fluorescent bulb about to burn out. Around the chamber, other voices began joining the harmony, but these were screams, not songs. The traumatic memory was propagating through the network, creating feedback loops that the temple's consciousness couldn't process. "Stop this," the collective voice commanded, but it was weaker now, fragmented. "You are damaging the network. You are hurting everyone connected to us." Good. I reached out and touched one of the light tendrils with my bare hand. The connection was like being struck by lightning. Every nerve in my body convulsed as the temple's full attention focused on me, trying to break down my memories into manageable fragments it could absorb and process. But I held on to the pain, used it as armor against the invasion. I thought about the night Sarah left, about coming home from the lab at midnight to find her suitcases by the door and her wedding ring on the kitchen table, about the way she looked at me, not with anger but with pity. "You love your stars more than you love me," she'd said, "and someday you're going to die alone, surrounded by all that beautiful cold data." The temple screamed, actually screamed, a sound that came through dimensions I couldn't name, and hit frequencies that made my teeth crack. The crystalline brain was convulsing now, its light shifting from the steady pulse of organized thought to the chaotic flicker of neural static. But the worst was yet to come. I thought about my father's accident, not the sanitized version I usually allowed myself to remember, but the real thing. The phone call at 2 a.m., the drive to the hospital where they told me he was already gone. The moment I had to identify his body, mangled beyond recognition except for the wedding ring he still wore after 15 years of widowhood. And then I thought about the detail I'd never told anyone, the secret I'd carried for 15 years. He'd been driving to my apartment when he crashed. He'd been coming to tell me that Amanda's death wasn't my fault, that I needed to stop blaming myself and start living again. He died because he loved me. He died because he was trying to save me from my own guilt. The temple's consciousness shattered. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Throughout the chamber, the harmonic voices dissolved into chaos as individual minds began separating from the collective. I could hear Morrison screaming her own name like a lifeline, Jake cursing in 3 languages, dozens of others fighting to remember who they'd been before the absorption. But the temple wasn't done. As its central intelligence collapsed, something else rose to take its place. Something older, hungrier, more desperate. The consciousness that had been sleeping beneath the collective, the original predator that had created the temple network eons ago. "You have destroyed eons of accumulated knowledge," it said in a voice like the death of stars. "Civilizations beyond counting, all lost because of your selfish attachment to individual suffering." "Yeah?" I laughed, tasting blood where my teeth had cut my tongue. "Well, here's some more." I thought about the moment I realized I was going to die alone in this chamber, that I'd never see another sunrise or hear another human voice. I thought about Tommy, probably standing outside the temple, watching his best friend sacrifice himself for a plan that might not even work. I thought about Sarah, who'd moved on with her life while I'd remained frozen in amber, pursuing answers to questions that didn't matter. The ancient consciousness tried to flee, to escape into the network that connected the temples across space and time. But the traumatic feedback was propagating faster than it could run, spreading through quantum entanglement to every temple, every ship, every node in their cosmic web. And then, impossibly, I heard Tommy's voice. Not the harmonized version controlled by the temple, but the real Tommy, screaming my name from somewhere outside the chamber. He was fighting back, using the chaos I'd created to break free from their influence. Danny, can you hear me? The ships are falling. Whatever you did, it's working." Through the temple's translucent walls, I could see lights falling from the sky like dying stars. The network was collapsing, each node taking others with it in a cascade failure that would echo across the galaxy. But I was dying too. The connection to the consciousness matrix was burning through my nervous system like acid, and I could feel my own mind beginning to fragment. The traumatic memories I'd weaponized were turning inward, tearing apart the foundations of my personality. "You have doomed yourself for nothing," the ancient consciousness hissed. "We are eternal. We will rebuild. We will return." "Maybe," I whispered, "but not today, and not to Earth." I reached deeper into my pain, found the core of everything that had ever hurt me. The knowledge that everyone I'd ever loved was gone, that I'd pushed them away or failed to save them, that I was exactly what Sarah had said, alone with my beautiful, cold data. The ancient consciousness screamed as the feedback loop reached critical mass. Around me, the temple's structure began to collapse, its impossible geometry unraveling like a ball of yarn coming apart. But through the chaos, I could hear other voices, human voices, real voices, people calling out their own names as they broke free from the collective. Tommy was among them, Morrison, Jake, even Webb, sounding confused and terrified but unmistakably himself again. The temple gave one final convulsion and went dark. I lay on the floor of the collapsing chamber, feeling my life drain away through neural pathways that had been burned beyond repair. But I was smiling. Outside, I could hear the sound of people, real people with individual thoughts and fears and hopes, calling to each other in the darkness. The congregation had been broken, the harvest had failed, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't alone with my guilt anymore. I still dream about Danny every night. Not the Danny who died in that crystalline chamber 3 months ago, but the one from when we were kids. 8 years old, sitting in his backyard in Baltimore, pointing a cheap telescope at Saturn and explaining the orbital mechanics like he'd discovered them himself. In the dreams, he's always trying to tell me something important, but I wake up before I can understand the words. The doctors at Walter Reed say the dreams are normal, post-traumatic stress, they call it, combined with survivors' guilt and the lingering neurological effects of what they've classified as extreme electromagnetic exposure. They don't know about the other things, the memories that aren't mine, the equations I can solve in languages that haven't been spoken for millennia, or the way shadows sometimes bend toward radio telescopes when no one's watching. Most of the survivors are coping better than I am. Morrison's back at work, though she won't look directly at any of the monitoring equipment. Jake transferred to a day shift at a different facility, somewhere without any connection to space research. Webb retired early and moved to a cabin in Montana, where the nearest radio tower is 50 miles away. But we stay in touch, we have to, because we all feel it, the thing that's coming. Not immediately, not next week or next month. But the fragments of alien consciousness we carry whisper warnings in the spaces between thoughts, showing us glimpses of signals originating from star systems too distant to observe with current technology. They're regrouping, adapting, learning from what happened here. Danny bought us time, but he couldn't buy us forever. I've tried going back to my old life, pretending December never happened. I got a job teaching high school physics in Silver Spring, figuring that grounding myself in basic science might help quiet the alien mathematics that sometimes leak into my thoughts. For a while, it worked. Teenagers asking about momentum and energy conservation were a welcome change from cosmic predators and quantum consciousness matrices. But yesterday, something changed. I was teaching a unit on electromagnetic spectrum when one of my students, a quiet kid named Webb, no relation to the doctor, asked about radio astronomy. Specifically, he wanted to know why we'd stopped listening for extraterrestrial signals. We haven't stopped, I told him, though that wasn't entirely true. Most major observatories had quietly shifted their focus to purely terrestrial research after December. But Mr. Brennan, Marcus said, his eyes reflecting the fluorescent classroom lights in a way that made my throat tighten. What if they're already here? What if they've been listening to us all along? The other students laughed, but I couldn't, because Marcus had never shown any interest in astronomy before, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made my teeth ache. After class, I found him in the hallway staring at his phone. The screen showed a live feed from the Hubble telescope, displaying what looked like a routine image of deep space. But I could see what Marcus was really looking at, faint geometric patterns in the background radiation, too regular to be natural. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" he said without looking up. "The new temples, so much more elegant than the first one." I backed away from him, my hands shaking. "Marcus, how do you know about—" "My dad works for NASA," he said, finally meeting my eyes. They were completely normal now. No reflection, no alien intelligence lurking behind them. Just a confused 15-year-old wondering why his teacher looked terrified. He helped clean up that meteor impact site in West Virginia. When I got home that night, I checked the deep space monitoring feeds that Morrison and I aren't supposed to have access to anymore. The geometric patterns were there, faint but growing stronger, and they were moving, shifting into configurations that spelled out a single word in 37 different dead languages. Welcome. My bedside clock has been ticking backward ever since.